Okay, so you guys know we have a quiz this week, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So our quiz is going to be on Friday. All right. So what's going to happen is you guys are going to be home when you take the quiz. Thursday, like when you guys are in class. So those of you that are in class on Thursday will be doing review on Thursday in class, and then those of you on in class on Friday will be doing review in class. And then we're all going to go home on Friday. We're going to take our quiz. Okay. And I'll have more explanation on that as we get closer. Okay. Um, so we'll do that. All right. So we're going to finish off with the river civilizations today. Tomorrow and Wednesday, we're going to be doing a gallery walk, kind of covering all the river valley civilizations. Those of you who are home are going to be doing a video on the Shang and Zhou dynasties, which is what we are covering today. Okay. And then I'll explain more of it in an update, but that's kind of the general sense of what we're doing. All right. So I'll also post the extra credit submission box today. So you guys who have all your information accounted for after today, if you want to submit your extra credit, you can do that. But it'll be due the day of the quiz. Okay. All right. So with that being said, let's get started. So the other river valleys we talked about, right? We talked about the Indus River Valley. We talked about the Egyptian River Valley, the Nile River Valley, I mean, and we talked about the Tigris Euphrates River Valley, which is the Mesopotamians. Okay, so just going over some important aspects of the Indus River Valley, or really the Harappan civilization. There's two major things to remember, right? The first major thing is going to be the city planning. Now, I feel bad for half the class on, I think actually my 8th period couldn't get to watch the video on Mojindaro, which is really cool. But we couldn't get to watch it in class because something happened, crazy thing happened. But remember, the important thing about the video kind of it talks about the kind of city planning itself, the grid system that they created, the fact that they had planned out the cities in a certain way to make sure that the important buildings are in the right spots, and on top of that, they had their own plumbing system, which is really cool. Okay. And then the other major thing that we talked about was that it was important for the Indus River Valley was the access to trade. Okay, they were able to trade based on their location with connection to the Indus River, but also to the oceans. Right, they're on a peninsula basically, and allow them to have good connection to a lot of other civilizations. All right, but now we're going to talk about China. Right, China is a very interesting place, especially when it comes to the river, their civilization itself. We know a lot about China because of how the writing system was, but they're different in a lot of ways. One of probably the biggest ways that we see is how advanced they became with their building structures, or even how well they thrived for a time. All right. For instance, when you take a look at the Great Wall, right? They started developing parts of the Great Wall, but really they started developing defensive barriers along the same time period in which we see the Great Pyramids being built, and even the great defensive walls of right? Now, the Chinese civilization is thriving even today, okay? And that's what's really important to understand, is that some of these other civilizations did not, they kind of died out. China kind of was almost a continuing civilization that was always growing, but it was just changing leaders, okay? So when you take a look at, first we're going to look at geography, all right? That's the first thing we always have to look at, geography. All right, when you take a look at geography, they basically have all different aspects of geography in one general area. Now, it's not like the civilization China is going to be just like the country we see today. Like, it's not going to be that size right away. But the fact that they have a lot of geographic barriers around them allows them to prosper for a very long time. All right. So they have all different types. They have deserts. They have plateaus. They have mountain ranges. They have rivers. They have the ocean. They really have everything that you could possibly have for a civilization, all in one spot. Okay, it allows them to be more isolated and more defended which allows them to prosper more than anybody else. Remember, one of the key major issues we focused on in the other civilizations was the fact that for Mesopotamia, they had no defensive barriers, well, geographic barriers. Egypt, the only barrier they had was the Sahara Desert. Then you look at India, they had defensive barriers above them, but the problem was that they had continuously national disasters that would weaken their civilization. China didn't have those problems. China actually was isolated from the world, allowed them to survive for a very long time because they weren't being attacked constantly. You'll notice that the difference between China and these other civilizations is that the fighting, instead of coming from the outside, it happens from within. All right, as in they fight each other instead of having other groups fight them. All right, when take a look at the river that is crucial to them, all right, is going to be the Huanghe River, or the Yellow River. All right, and the reason why we call it the Yellow River is that it leaves this fertile silt is yellow in color when it floods. Right, and that's why it's known as the Yellow River. Right, now the Yellow River is really powerful, very similar to the Tigris and Euphrates, very similar to the Nile River, and even the Indus River, where when it floods in a bad way, maybe not the Nile because the Nile was pretty mild, but when it floods, it can wipe out villages and cells, and that's why it used to always have the nickname of China's Sorrow. Okay, but the important thing about China, as I mentioned already, is that because of their isolation, because of their geographic location, allows them to be isolated but self-sufficient. As in, they weren't being invaded by other people. They were allowed to basically run themselves without interference, which allowed them to survive a lot longer than anybody else. And that's why they become a very prosperous civilization, because they weren't really involved in outsiders, fighting them off. Now, obviously, we're going to talk about the Mongolians. They will be an outsider that does kind of beat them. However, that takes many, many years to occur. That's going to happen later on in the course. So just think of all the years that passes and they survive and kind of thrive, allows them to kind of, build a stable civilization for a long time. Now, the interesting thing about China is that in the heartland, only 10% of the land is suitable for farming. And the reason why is because you look at all the different geographic features mentioned on the last page of all these different things that can cause some issues. Now, 10% of land is farmable, and that's along the rivers, okay? And this was considered the heartland of civilization, where basically all their major cities are located, and it allows them to kind of, create a stable food force, okay? Using the fertile soil that is, that it's someone trying to present, it says on my screen. But okay. Deny. Okay. So.
Sorry, I need to press that.
Yeah, it's okay. I was just like, what the heck? So the important thing is, as I mentioned, their heartland is along the Yellow River, but it's in the land in between the two major rivers that they have, right? So you take a look at the heartland. For some reason it's not letting me write, but the heartland here, in the middle of the page, has like the dashed lines. Okay, that is going to be the heartland of where China's farming becomes. Okay. So when you take a look at the first dynasty, now the first dynasty is the Xia dynasty. Okay, see right here, and they kind of use flood control systems or irrigation systems to allow them to prosper the most. Okay, and that's what allows them to thrive. As in, they do for a time period allow this group to prosper because they have controlled the river to a certain extent. However, this dynasty does disappear pretty quickly, and we see the transition of the Shang dynasty. The Shang dynasty becomes probably one of the more powerful dynasties of the time period. It lasts from 1700 to 1027 BC. And they're the first ones to leave written records, which really allows us to know much about them. Now, under the Shang dynasties, thriving cities do emerge, right? One of the cities that we see in the beginning was based on, was made of wood, of Anyang, all right, and this became the capital city of the Shang dynasty. Now, what's interesting about these cities, and we can find based on remnants and even written documents, is they had an excellent way of making defensive barriers. Okay, excellent defensive barriers, which allow them to create a more secure force, a more secure city from not really from people from outside, but let's just say there are bandits that are trying to steal material, steal goods from the city itself. They were able to easily defend against it. All right. And we're going to see over time, as I mentioned already, a lot of the times conflict happened between people within China, not really from outside. When you take a look at the civilization itself, the important thing to understand here is that they started to first recognize themselves as being really the center of the world, as in they had this confidence about themselves that they had deemed that they were the center of the world, and other people that outside of China were uncivilized, okay? And they created this idea where people, the most important thing is the group rather than the individual themselves. And this is a crucial to the civilization because it kind of creates an importance on not only helping your family's name grow and making sure that you do the right thing for your family, but to help China itself as a civilization. All right, and family becomes a crucial part of Chinese society, right? Especially the ancient civilization. Okay, the elder males were always the head of the household. Okay, women had literally not a lot of rights at all. They were expected to obey all the men, even the sons. Okay, and obviously, if a man, an older, the patriarch or the eldest man dies, then that means the son, his oldest son, would then take over the family's businesses or control the family. And the only way in order to help to gain more rights in your household or really a woman's job in the household was to have more children, hopefully have her more sons. Okay. When it comes to the social classes of China, it's really a lot easier to look at this when compared to we looked at like Egypt or Mesopotamia, right? There's only 4 groups here. The very top is going to be a king, right? These classes are all very sharply divided and very difficult to navigate into a higher level. We see this for a certain amount of time until they start to create in China the civil service exam, and which is, we'll talk about that later, but most of the people are always set in certain parts. The interesting thing about the Chinese civilization, the ancient Chinese civilization, is that warriors were deemed to be more important than even just the rich nobles themselves. Okay, at the very bottom, we're going to be the peasants. Now you look at the different roles in society. The nobles were basically people that were controlling a certain portion of land, and this is where the peasants worked on. They worked on the nobles' land, and then they would obviously give them crops, give them their produce, and the nobles would then pay tribute to the kings. Okay, and that's how this kind of system worked. And we're going to see this system grow and grow, very similar to a feudalistic system. Okay, but we'll talk about that later on. Now, when it comes to religious beliefs, one of the key beliefs when it comes to the ancient Chinese civilization is about how the impact of ancestors on modern times is that they can, if you have if you created honor for your ancestors and they lived honorable lives, they can help you in the long run. They can provide you luck, and they seemed as a being that if you didn't do right by your ancestors, that bad things would happen to you and your family, which shows that you showed disrespect. So there's a lot of different ways in which they paid honor to their ancestors. They used oracle bones to kind of consult with the gods. The supreme god of the time was Shang, right? And they kind of show their kind of importance to family ties, especially when it comes to the afterlife itself. When you take a look at the written system, now they had a written system that was based on syllables, not on phrases. In certain parts of the writing, though, they did have a certain symbols represent a specific word or things like that. Especially when you take a look at the bottom here, right? They have ancient symbols versus the modern symbols of the day, right? And some of them would represent really certain subjects. Okay, so a symbol for ox, symbol for goat and sheep, symbol for tree, right? They had so many different people in the period that had different languages, but they still use the same written language, which is very interesting. The fact that they're able to now different. Basically, it's the idea of having different dialects of China, but then all of a sudden they all have the same written language, which allows them to communicate each other, especially when it comes to interacting, maybe letters or even written documents. Okay. Now the difficulty of the language itself is the fact that there are so many different characters of the system of writing that it's hard to basically to learn, especially if it's something new. However, the important thing to understand about how the written system benefits China is that they're all using the same one. Okay, so when this main idea question I posted on the side says, how did writing help unite China? They all use the same system, right? Granted, you might have a different dialect of language on one part of China versus a different, but you're all using the same written language that allows you to communicate with each other a lot easier than before. Now, with the Shang dynasty was controlling for a time. However, around 1027, obviously that was the end of the Shang dynasty, the Zhou dynasty ends up taking over, all right? And there ends up becoming really this shift or this change of a dynasty dying out, right? And a new dynasty taking over. So let me explain what I mean by that, all right? So there's always a shift in power, right? And we saw this with Mesopotamia, where they said outsiders came in. They sometimes would allow the outsiders to come in because they hated the rulership of the previous class. That kind of happens, but it happens now with people within China themselves. So when the Shang dynasty at the very end was not doing so well, as in tribute was going too high, there were natural disasters happening, especially with the rivers are being out of control. The Zhou leadership, or really the people that had rebelled to take over the Shang dynasty, had really declared that their power had come from the gods, and that the gods wanted them to take over, right? And it now creates this justification for their takeover or their rebellion, and they name this the mandate of heaven, right? And the mandate of heaven basically is the concept where the gods are the sole reasons why you have that power, right? As in, you became the leader because God believed that you are the right leader for the job, all right? And this idea of mandate of heaven becomes a central figure to how these relationships with the government and their people happen on a daily basis. Now, the way that this cycle that they explain, and I'll go into more detail for you, is basically, if the gods deem you to be a bad leader, that means bad things happen to society, right? And they call this a dynastic cycle, where basically a dynasty rises and falls, and then a new dynasty takes over. So I'll do a pretty easy one. Okay, so let's just say the first dynasty starts out. All right, they take control. They do, they restore order and peace to society, claiming to have the mandate of heaven. We're saying that God gave us this power, this divine right to live and rule. Okay, the dynasty then transitions to having a good prosperity. Right, they do great, so showing that the mandate of heaven is true. We are the right leaders for the job. As time progresses, the dynasty gets older. Things start to go bad a little bit, right? Starts to decline. People become corrupt. Taxes are going up. Government is getting weaker. This is not showing a good sign. Transitions. All of a sudden, bad things happen, as in disasters, floods, famines, people revolting. There's invasions from outside forces. All these things could be happen, right? Bad stuff happens. Then we transition to the next part, right? This 5 down here. Unfortunately, it's not letting me write. This next part, okay? All of a sudden, they say the mandate of heaven is now being lost, right? They're saying that dynasty is not the dynasty that's going to give a prosperity to the people. They deem the gods have now looked away from this dynasty. That's not who they want anymore, okay? Lastly, dynasty gets overthrown. Bloodshed happens. A new dynasty goes in, and the cycle just continues again and again. Okay, and that's what we're going to see in China happen a lot. These new dynasties use the mandate of heaven to justify themselves as being the rulers, and then the same cycle is going to keep going on and keep going on. Okay, with this happening, the Zhou dynasty basically now takes complete control, and now they really amp up the idea of feudalism. All right, now one of the crucial things that the Zhou dynasty realized is they need to try to basically have the nobles, the people that control the land themselves, have some sort of a loyalty to the king. Okay, they need to make sure that these people that are controlling these areas are loyal, because that's how they took over. As in, they were starting to kind of spread a lot of not like misinformation, but more like started to spread more ideas of rebellion against the Shang dynasty, the Zhou, the people that were leaders of the Zhou, which were basically a noble class. Okay, and they had started spreading this to a lot of people, which allowed rebellion to happen. So they wanted to try to fix that issue, right? So they wanted to provide basically people that would be loyal to them to lead certain parts of China on their steed. And what they would do is they would allow them to rule those areas as long as they paid basically taxes to the Zhou dynasty. Okay, and this is a concept known as feudalism, where the king gives land to the nobles in exchange for services. All right. Now, over time, as these nobles got stronger and stronger, and as you see on the part right here, they get stronger and stronger. They think that they don't need the king, that they can rule themselves. And then all of a sudden, things start to get a little hazy. Things start to get a little bad, because these lords now think that they can try to expand their territory and have control over different parts, more area than they did before. Now, along with this transition, this dynasty, as it grows on, we start to see a kind of a connection happen, right? Where we start to see more roads being built, as in China is now more connected than ever before. We see new canals being made, new types of transportation, coins that are used for trading, all right? New weaponry, iron cast tools, food production increases. This is all going great. However, at the same time, different nobles of the area of China, all the nobles that the Zhou dynasty had given land to, are now expanding their land even more. Okay, this gets to a breaking point where now these nobles are competing for power to the point where they go to war. As in, these groups are now, they first off starts to have a full-out battle to see who controls the most land, okay? And it causes mayhem, right? The Zhou capital gets overthrown, the monarch gets killed, and hell breaks loose, okay? Now we see this era known as the Warring States period, right? Basically a full-out civil war, a straight-up battle for who's the strongest noble territory, and they're going to be battling out with one another using these new weapons, a full-out war that lasts several years, okay? And that's where we're going to stop for today. It's kind of a perfect spot, because next time we talk about China again, we're going to talk about how the war ends and who becomes the winner and how that winner does, all right? But the Warring States period, guys, is going to be a topic that's going to be a reoccurring issue that happens in China. It also happens in Japan as well, and we'll talk about that later on. But there is going to be a lot of issues going on, but this is a growing issue that continues to happen. And a lot of these different, especially on this GIF you see here, is basically this ever-moving picture, shows how the Warring States period kind of happens, where each of these different colors represent a different noble and their territory. And as nobles are battling against each other for territory, they end up gaining more and more land off each other, okay? So any questions on that?
No.
You good?
I just have a question about the quiz.
Mm-hmm.
I think you kind of said it when I was still joining. So we on Friday at home?
Yes, you guys are gonna take it at home.
Okay.
Right? So you're not gonna be in school. So what happens is the class that will be here on Thursday will review in class. Then the kids who are in school on Friday will review in class. You guys will both take the quiz. I'll open it at the same time on Friday when you guys are home. All right. You guys will take the quiz. It'll be a timed quiz anyway. So you'll take the quiz. You'll complete the quiz, and then I'll get the grades. And obviously it's the same thing like a regular quiz. but at least you guys will both have time to review the material. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay. I think trying to see about time. I think we have 6 minutes left. So what you guys are doing today, and I'll show you. You guys have the worksheet that's posted on the side, the Shang and Zhou dynasty. It's a little bit of, it's a reading. Okay, so
we're learning about the Shang Zhou dynasty.
Yep. So it's like, all right, so let me zoom out. So it makes it easier. It's a little bit of reading. It just shows the Shang dynasty and then the Zhou dynasty, right? On the other two sides, you're going to answer these following terms, and then you'll fill out the graphic organizer that talks about the social classes, economy, government, and religion, and arts and science. And then I say at the very end, in your own opinion, which of the two dynasties has the biggest accomplishment, right? Like which has the most accomplishments? Is it the Shang or the Zhou?